Hey, it's Cairo. So, it's July 3rd. I didn't do a vlog yesterday, but I'm gonna try to do 2 today, because my resolution is to try to do 1 every day. So, yeah. These are kind of unscripted, I just kind of spur of the moment things, and the first, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 30 maybe is gonna suck, but I guess that's just kind of the way things are. When I first started doing streams about a year ago, my god, they were just embarrassing. But, you know, hopefully they'll get better. I bought a little tripod off Amazon, and this one's going to be less shaky. So anyway, let's talk about these chameleons. So these are 2 chameleon specimens, and as you can see, they are dissected. This right here is a female veiled chameleon, and she died of pneumonia. And when I opened her up, her lung was just totally filled with fluid, and here, let me get a better shot of her. Her lung was just really filled up with fluid, and you know, her body cavity had a lot of excess fluid, and she was just kind of a mess. But she had some follicles in there for the eggs, and she's generally healthy with the exception of the pneumonia. I took a lot of photos of her. She's going to be an infographic, and oh, she's pretty interesting. She's a good sort of little specimen of where things are in terms of organs and stuff. So I'm going to take a couple seconds just to point out some key features in her to orient ourselves to talk about the next one. So she died of pneumonia, and her lung is kind of filled with pus and fluid, and it's on these chameleons. It's actually very difficult to get the side of the body off without damaging the lung. So her lung is collapsed, but you can still kind of see it right there. Behind the lung right here is the stomach. This down here is the liver. This is the digestive tract. So the digestive tract in chameleons, in veiled chameleons, has this black melanistic covering over it, and what that does is the melanin in the intestinal covering actually protects it from the damaging UV rays that could damage the tissue and the DNA in the cells in there. Because one of the things that digest the intestinal lining, especially I mean, this is true for most of the digestive tract, is that the cells themselves are constantly replenishing themselves. Like, if you think about it, in you, the stomach lining turns over every week or so. So with that much cell division and with that much constant tissue growth and changing, if you have damaging effects of UV rays, then it's really easy to get a replication mistake in there, or some kind of cell division mistake that then causes cancer. So since chameleons need to spend a lot of time in the sun just basking, they have this black covering over their digestive tract that protects it. She had a fat pad on the side, but I've removed it to better show the follicles. So here we see the follicles, which are sort of beginnings of eggs. And then here on this edge we see a kidney. This kidney is actually in terrible shape because she had kidney failure and fluid buildup. But yeah, that's where the kidney would be. So anyway, that's the veiled girl. Give me 1 second. And here we have the Jackson's chameleon girl. So having sort of talked about the organs in the veiled, they have some of this very similar organ arrangement, and you can kind of orient yourselves right around here. You can see the liver in her. She's got a big space, and that's where the lung would have been. But it was, like I said, it was really difficult to get the side of the body out without puncturing the lung. So that entire empty space in there would have been filled by the lung. So, any guesses to how she died? It's because of this. So right off the bat, you notice that she has a lot of eggs. And if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram or some other social media, you've probably seen that infographic I've done with the female chameleon, mother chameleon, where the side of her body is open and she's got tons of babies, right? So in this particular species, I mean, the veiled is not that way, but in this particular species, in Jackson's chameleons, they give birth to live young. So if she was actually reproducing, those things in there wouldn't be eggs, they would be fetuses. They're eggs because they're unfertilized. And so she actually died of egg binding. so egg binding is the sort of situation that you see in a lot of captive reptiles and also birds. If you have chickens or something, this happens all the time too, where they have eggs and they have a hard time laying them. And unfortunately, C-section and this type of, these epidural and, pregnancy type procedures are not really available, or usually not available in time for these types of animals. So usually it's a thing that gets fatal pretty quickly. And I see a lot of egg binding things. They're fairly common. But in a situation where the eggs are still unfertilized, she still produces eggs. And so basically she produced all these eggs. She's unable to lay them. She became really stressed in the laying process. The eggs became caused a lot of inflammation, and there's dystocia, and then she died. So, yeah, so egg binding is actually really common, and it's particularly common in captive reptiles. You don't really see this in wild animals, because wild animals, they're really resource strapped. If you're living in the wild, you don't know where your next meal is coming from, conditions are really bad, and, you can't be producing all these extra eggs, and then, and getting rid of them, and having reproductive dead ends, right? But in captivity, there's two things. Generally, the nutrition is better, so they're getting more food than they would in the wild, so they have extra resources to devote to reproduction. And also, things like environmental conditions are different. Okay, so like in people, I'm sorry, there's a lot of children screaming in the background because it's the neighbors. But in people, you see reproduction is also highly linked to environment, and in mammals too. Like when you see animals that are seasonal breeders, they know when to reproduce from the length of day, from the temperature, and so on. And reptiles are like this too, where they'll determine best times for optimal reproduction based on the length of the photo period, the length of the day, the temperatures, and so on. So in captivity, it's really hard to replicate wild type conditions. And so a lot of times they'll ovulate at times that are not necessarily appropriate, or they'll start producing eggs just because the conditions are right and they have the extra resources to do so. And a lot of times, the eggs then just, they're not able to get laid and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that contribute to egg binding, but this is just kind of a fairly interesting specimen to talk about. So, yep, chameleons.